All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to the Lopardo Inn of Court for our May meeting. I'm excited about this meeting for a couple of reasons. One, it's my team that put this together and I'm really proud of the work that they've done. But even more than that, I'm excited about the topic that we'll be tackling this evening with substance abuse and competency of lawyers. So for those of you that have logged in this evening, I think you're going to see a really fascinating program. We've got an amazing speaker. I'm not going to take away from my colleagues by telling you anything about her other than stay tuned. She's got some great information for us, especially those of us in North County. I'd see that Howard Franco has done what I'm going to encourage people to do. If you have questions or announcements that you'd like to make, feel free to go either into the chat or to the Q&A at the bottom of your screen and type that in. Because we're using the Zoom seminar platform, it's really not possible for us to do what you might do in other meetings where you raise your hand either virtually or in person and have us call on you. But if you have questions or comments, that's a great place to put those. We'll make sure those questions get to us, especially to our speaker, and hopefully you'll have some great questions for her while she's here. Howard wants me to announce that the North County Bar is having their virtual meeting next Thursday, May 20th at 5:30. Their speaker is Phyllis Chang, who was the Fair Employment and Housing Commissioner during Governor Brown and Governor Schwarzenegger's administrations. It will give you CLE credit toward elimination of bias. It's always a nice one to have as well. And so the North County Bar will also be circulating a survey for further future operations and programs. So if you've got some ideas of programs that you think you want them to do, feel free to let them know, and you can go through Howard or anybody else that you know in the North County Bar. And the same thing for us. I know Bill Kamajaran is on the panel with us today, and he's going to talk a little bit about membership, but I just want to in advance promote the idea that if you've got ideas for programming for next year's programs, which we, fingers crossed, hope will be in person back at the Carlsbad Senior Center, then go ahead and share those with Bill. He'll make sure they get to his committee and we can make some good decisions about that. So with that, let me turn to Bill. He's standing in for Eric Norvell today as membership chair. Bill, if you're with us, if you've got any announcements
Yes.
or report from Eric.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? My video's out, but the audio's supposed to be in. Can you hear me?
It is.
Good.
I can hear you.
First, I want to suggest that each of you look in the current issue of the North County Lawyer magazine. We have a recruitment article that talks about the next term. If you have friends or colleagues or even opposition counsel who you think might enjoy what we do, I would encourage you to take a look at that article. It's got all the information. And if you know people who are interested, please send your application to Eric Norvell. His email is eric.e.norvell@norvellawfirm.com. Secondly, we need to know for planning programs for the next term, which of you will be returning. So some of you have started to respond to me and Eric already. If you would start to do that and let us know so that we can set up teams for the next term. Finally, regarding programs, the program committee has met several times. We have a tentative working roster, which includes several programs which I think are both relevant and timely. We're going to have a well-known San Diego attorney, Michael Marinan, who's going to be talking about policing the police. We're going to have a psychologist to talk about dealing with stress in the COVID and post-COVID world. We're also thinking of programs on how to evaluate your case, when and how you structure attorney fees, multi-generational practice of law, etc. So if you would keep these dates in mind, mid-June, we need to know who is returning. And if you have new recruits, please forward them on again. Again, you can send them to either me, wck@wcklegal.com, or Eric Norvell at enorvell@norvellfirm.com. I look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Bill. I appreciate that. And thank you for agreeing to stand in for Eric. as well. Let me turn now to our treasurer, Randy. What's our treasurer's report for this evening?
Good evening, President Washington. I've got good news. The treasurer is pleased to report a surplus year-to-date of $2,830. And that's good because we experimented this year with a reduced due structure because we didn't have the same level of expense this year because we're meeting virtually. So that's good to report. Also, I will report that I am going to be sending an email shortly to some of the executive committee members about a pretty short list of delinquent outstanding invoices that I believe are most or all inactive members. And so I want to clear our delinquent invoice list. So I think we've collected about all we're going to collect this year. And we've got a list of about 10 inactive members who I think are mostly inactive. But so far, year to date, we've done well. We've got a nice reserve that's built up. Nice problem to have. We've got about $40-some thousand in reserves that are just sitting there for a rainy day or for some brilliant idea. But that's something that we'll have to address as an executive committee. But that's my report. Everything looks good from the treasurer's perspective.
All right. Thank you so much, Randy. I appreciate that. And again, if you know you're one of those people that haven't paid your dues, but there's some problem, we know certainly during the pandemic, things have not gone as predictably as anybody would have anticipated. Feel free to just Randy or I know, we'll make some arrangements. We'd rather have your membership than to have you decide, well, I'm not going to be a part of them anymore because right now it's just a tough time for me financially. We'll work something out for you in that regard. And so there's some poll questions that we want to ask tonight as part of our presentation. So I'm going to ask Lou to put those up right now if he could. And it's fairly short. There's only 3 questions. But if you're logged in, if you could just take a moment to complete this survey. And so the first 2 are yes, no, or no idea, or I'm not sure. And the last one is just a yes, no question. And as you're doing that, let me just talk briefly and by way of introduction. So part of what this program tonight is designed to do, it's designed to raise awareness and for both the issue and the resources necessary to combat substance abuse, especially amongst lawyers in California. And so the state requires lawyers, as you all know, to take CLE course or courses to get information about the topic of substance abuse. As you take their attorney oath, one of the things you swear to do is you swear a duty to discharge your role to the best of your knowledge and ability in accordance with the law. And so that's that whole professional responsibility and duty of competency that each attorney swears to as a member of the bar. And what we've done, and I know as a member of this and other programs, we spend a lot of time in this state and other places talking about substance abuse and really talking just about alcohol, in part because of what alcohol represents. It's a lawful drug for attorneys to consume. You can go to a number of registered businesses that have licenses to sell that drug to you almost any time and day of night. I've got friends that live in other states and they're amazed that, wait, you got liquor in a grocery store? Wait, you can buy alcohol on Sundays? Yeah, California doesn't have some of those restrictions to alcohol. And as a result, many people think that use or abuse of alcohol isn't that big an issue to come forward to express. But if they're a lawyer that's using and abusing either prescription drugs or even worse, illegal narcotics, then there's a stigma associated with that. And so what we wanted to do this evening is to have a frank discussion about that, understand what our responsibilities are for ourselves and our clients, what our responsibilities are as we deal with our colleagues or those that might oppose us, that we see, that we recognize might have some concerns, because there are obligations that attorneys and judges have when we see somebody else that might not be able to competently carry out their job because of their use or abuse of substances. We'll talk a little bit about that tonight. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the first of my team members on Team 6, and that's David Doria. And David, I'll let you take it from here. And
Thank
Lou,
you,
if
Judge
want,
Washington.
you can probably take the survey down.
So I'm just going to spend about 5 to 10 minutes touching on 4 small topics. So I want to talk about the applicable rules of professional conduct when it comes to drug abuse and its effects on your legal practice. Also, the fact that abuse is on the rise right now during COVID. Also want to talk quickly about just being careful about sneaky kind of supplements and other unregulated drugs, which people sometimes use to replace their alcohol addictions or narcotic addictions, and they don't end up faring much better because those drugs can be pretty dangerous too. And then lastly, I wanted to just touch on the importance of, if you do go into treatment, getting detox, especially through a medication. It's the importance of coordinating and communicating well with your physician during that time. So as to the applicable rules of professional conduct, we're looking primarily at rules 1.1 and 1.3, which have to do respectively with competence and diligence. And so for both of those, it's important that what you do is not intentional, reckless, with gross negligence, or repeated. Notice the word or. You don't have to do those things in combination. You do any one of those things with regard to competence or diligence, and you're looking at punishment up to and including disbarment. And so regarding competence, we're talking about your learning and your skill level, and especially with regard to drug abuse, you're talking mental and emotional ability. And with regard to diligence, we're talking about your commitment and dedication to the interests of the client, which when you're talking about drug addiction and what it does to basically hijack the priorities of your brain, you can see how that would easily keep you from putting the attention where it belongs, which is on your client. So right now during COVID, we are having a spike in not only drug abuse, but even overdose deaths. Overdose deaths began spiking in the beginning of the pandemic. They've ebbed a little bit, but for the most part have continued to rise. So for example, the CDC reports that between October 2019 and September 2020, there's been a 29% rise in overdose deaths across the country. And that's just the most recent data I found spanning up to September 2020. It could be worse now. Also, as far as supplements that I mentioned in the beginning, I've seen a lot just anecdotally and reading articles. A lot of people will replace things like heroin with newer unregulated drugs. And a lot of times these drugs are not safe just because they're unregulated. The reason they're unregulated, what I should say is they aren't unregulated necessarily because they're safe. Sometimes they just have not been around for a very long time, and the studies are not out yet to warrant the necessary legislation. So one such example is a drug called kratom, which can often be found off store shelves. It's sometimes does not even have age requirements, but a lot of treatment detox facilities will treat it just like a heroin addiction if you come in detoxing from this kratom stuff. So I just want to make sure people are careful of that. They don't say, okay, well, don't worry, I'm not using heroin, I'm not abusing alcohol, I'm using this kratom stuff, and there's no laws against that. By the way, on that topic, San Diego is the one city in California that has banned kratom, and the county is getting ready to probably do the same thing. And then lastly, I did just want to point out the importance, if you do go into detox or treatment for something, it's really important to not just assume that the medication you're being given is some sort of magic bullet, and that as long as you take it, it's going to cure your addiction. Seeing your psychologist and coordinating and communicating well with your doctor is extremely important. Anecdotally, I had an old acquaintance years ago. Gosh, we're talking early 2000s. And it turned out that he had been hiding a heroin addiction from me, his friends, and his family for years. And he finally came clean with us, and he decided to go into a program to receive medication to detox and replace his heroin. And he responded well initially. It was really miraculous the way he responded. But as they increased his dosages, he became erratic and started behaving essentially drunk around family and friends, who in turn begged him, please tell your doctor to lower the dose. And within a week, his grandmother found him dead from respiratory failure in their house. And they did an autopsy. The only thing in him was not heroin, but it was the medication they were using to actually wean him off of the heroin. And I have to believe that that was at least in part because of the lack of communication with his doctor to make sure that he was getting the right dose and to relay the experience he was having on the drug. So thanks for listening to me. With that, I will turn things back over to Karen to introduce our speaker for the evening.
So I'm Karen Calabrese. I'm particularly excited to introduce our speaker this evening, as she is a former client of mine, and I think a friend at this point after the years we spent together preparing for trial. This is Dr. Laura Rossi. She's a licensed forensic and clinical psychologist who's been working with high-risk adults and youth for many years. She's active in the community, giving presentations about the treatment of opioid addiction, and has served as an expert witness in court. I first met Dr. Rossi back in 2012 when she had just founded the opioid treatment program SOAPMAT right in Oceanside. She had previously been managing an opioid treatment program for a national company and saw on a daily basis how she thought she could be doing it better by having a more patient-focused and more compassionate system of treatment. And I can tell you, I've been to her clinic many times now, and I can see she's made a point of changing the narrative of a stark clinical facility to presenting more of a professional medical office with couches and artwork, and really focused on treating her patients with dignity and respect, and a focus on overall patient wellness. Well, her former employer was not too happy with her departure. Therefore, she became my client and is now very successful with her own clinic, and we're all very proud of her. And I think Eric and Kelly from Clear Sky are on tonight. We all worked with Laura for a very long time. And I will never forget one Saturday afternoon during lunch when we were doing depot prep. And just during conversation, I mentioned to Dr. Rossi that I had had a recent dental procedure and had been, without asking for it, been prescribed Percocet in case I had any pain. And I just mentioned this to her, and she immediately became irate and named several medications they should have given me instead that would be, less risky for me, less likely for me to develop any kind of addiction. And so, of course, when our team was assigned this topic, I immediately thought of that conversation and of Dr. Rossi, and thought she'd be a great person to talk to us about opioid addiction and how this happens. So we've kind of decided to do more of a question answer format. I know she has so much information to give, and a lot of medical stuff, and we're going to try and limit the words that when we were talking about it, words were going over my head. So we're just going to kind of talk about the things that we've talked about in preparation for this. And after we're kind of done that part, if anyone has any questions, she really is such a wealth of knowledge that we both welcome you to ask her anything. But to start off, Laura, if I can call you Laura, first let's kind of talk about what is opioid addiction, what kind of drugs are we talking about, and how do these types of addictions begin?
So first of all, thanks everyone for having me, and a special hello to Eric and Kelly who are on the call. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you guys so much for asking me to present. It's a lot to cram into 30 minutes, so it's going to be hard. So if anything seems choppy, you're more than welcome to email me or contact me after, and we can talk more. Okay, so addiction is a complex medical brain disease involving the disruption of the reward circuitry of the brain. Okay, we know this. And So an individual engages in maladaptive behavior patterns and or ingests substances despite negative consequences. That's the true ASAM definition of addiction. An individual has a propensity to develop an addiction really by means of 4 major factors, which is a genetic predisposition, pleasure center of the brain activation, life experiences, environment, and exposure. So the individual develops physiological dependence, psychological dependence, eventually withdrawal and tolerance. Those are the also 4 sort of aspects of addiction. And it's sort of like, you know, people weave in and out of different elements of that. There also is a severity of illness that different people present. Not everybody is the same. And so I believe really in my whole framework is about the individual and really what are the factors that the patient is presenting with. For example, one of the things that I really say to patients is I do a little questionnaire. What is your substance of choice? What do you use? How much do you use? The route in which you used it, your height, your weight, and your metabolic rate. Those 6 factors really impact, you know, in addition to exposure and genetics, those all together need to be taken into consideration for a full picture of the patient in terms of, you know, how we treat each person. I always like to talk about new and exciting research in this field because I think it's relevant. One of the things that's really interesting is that dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter or chemical messenger, used to be seen as producing a euphoric effect. That is always kind of how you think about dopamine. Dopamine also is always thought of when you talk about cocaine or stimulant medications or drugs. But in fact, dopamine is produced and urged and stimulated throughout all levels of addiction. And one of the things that we've learned is that dopamine is now considered a reinforcer or a reward instead of just euphoric effect. That's really interesting because it reminds me of classical conditioning that you think about. Something that's a previously unconditioned stimulus with an unconditioned response becomes a conditioned stimulus and a conditioned response based on, yes, a euphoric effect, but basically the person not even consciously realizing that they're trying to mimic the same process over and over and over again. Of course, desiring the same effect as they initially felt, but longitudinally do not feel anymore because of, as you guys know, tolerance. The other interesting fun fact that's emerged is about people with, in general, low baseline levels of feel-good neurotransmitters. This is something that we never really talked about before because you automatically assumed that a person had some big trauma or a family issue that had been covered up or, you know, someone had self-medicated for, and as a result developed an addiction. That's not necessarily true. Someone can just present with a very normal history, with no major life event, and has a low baseline level of what I call feel-good chemicals in their brain. And as a result, they sort of inadvertently find themselves med seeking, maybe sometimes had been prescribed something and thereafter become addicted. So I think that's also really important to think about.
So let's talk about what kinds of drugs are we talking about? I know David mentioned heroin before, and I think that's what comes to everyone's mind. But, you know, what are some of these other drugs that, you know, people should be aware of are in this category of opioids?
So, you know, my specialty area is definitely heroin. I was telling David and Michael when we started that that's sort of where my passion lies. But we're talking about all levels of opioids, which are not in the same, they're in the same class of opioids, but there's different reaction potential for each. And each individual sort of ascribes to a different predilection of what they desire based on possibly what they've been prescribed or what they've experienced or experimented with thereafter. So we're talking about some of the lower level ones, Norco and Vicodin. Another tier level up, you're talking about Percocet, which is, you know, for a dental procedure, if somebody's giving you Percocet, that of course raises the alarm bells. Then you're talking about, you know, morphine and codeine, hydromorphone, oxycodone, OxyContin, and then you're really emerging to Dilaudid, which is something that you get in the hospital, which is almost at the level of an anesthetic. It's a, you know, obviously a very, very high potent level opioid. But you're also talking about, a synthetic opioid like fentanyl, which, as you guys know, is rampant at this point. One of the things I was telling Karen is that, we think just because we're close to the border in San Diego, and all the fent that's coming in, that we just automatically assume that, we're at most risk. But fentanyl is now being manufactured throughout the world. I just read an article, Lebanon and Syria are now involved in such a mass production of fentanyl that it's exceeding each of their GDPs. So it's just the amount of this drug that's coming out is so scary, and it's obviously concerning because I think it's just probably going to get worse. OxyContin is always very important to talk about because, we saw Big Pharma push OxyContin for the past roughly 20 plus years. And I was thinking about this presentation and saw a special on the Big Pharma group, Purdue, and how they got busted after making billions and billions of dollars, as you guys probably potentially followed that case. The interesting part is that their minions were going around and their reps were teaching physicians about the low addictive level of OxyContin in particular. And they were saying that 1% or less patients become addicted to OxyContin. And so you already know what happened there. I mean, years and years of trying to dismantle ourselves from this has occurred. And it's really scary because patients truly felt that they were taking a prescription. And then this, of course, proliferated into, of course, potentiating heroin abuse and misuse and, now fentanyl. So you can just see how things can escalate very quickly.
So I know when you and I had talked in preparation for this presentation, I had sort of said to you, it seems like there really is a stigma associated with this type of addiction. Whereas, as Judge Washington had mentioned, alcoholism starts as a fun social thing, whereas opioid addiction is not. And there is a stigma that, people are of a lower socioeconomic, in a lower economical situation, that they end up in this type of addiction because of that. Or, this is, I don't know, homeless people begin this addiction, and it's not people like us. And, obviously when we talked, that doesn't seem to be the case. So could you talk a little bit about that?
So it's interesting, the deleterious nature of the drug causes everybody to sort of physically look aesthetically the same, which is very interesting. I could go on about that for a long time. People start to actually look like each other, even though they're from various SES backgrounds. So I'm really fascinated by that. One of the things I was telling Michael and David when we were starting is that the neighbors where I work are very concerned and call these patients aesthetically displeasing. That's actually how they've been described, my patients. And we've got lawyers, we've got doctors. I told Karen a story where I bought a car, and I was in the Mini Cooper dealership years and years ago. And one of the people that was helping me and was great and who I really liked and my husband liked, I literally was in my clinic 1 to 2 days later and went, turned around, and there he was face to face with me. And we, he's still my patient, and we've never discussed it. He never mentioned it. I know he recognized me. We always had a connection thereafter, but we didn't know, I knew it was him. I don't know if he knew it was me. And I still to this day wonder if he ever knew it was me, but this happens all the time. I have a high level surgeon right now at my facility. I have all different SES backgrounds, but the one thing I really think is important that I try to tell people in these presentations, which really bothers me, is that several years ago, I had to be sort of listening to DEA when they went out into the community and told people that the reason for the opioid epidemic and in terms of the heroin transition was the fact that patients just couldn't get their opioid medication anymore and they went onto the streets. That is partially true, but it's not 100% true. There was an existing heroin problem. That's sort of where I come into the fold, because I know those people, and those are my peeps. And that's where I got my reputation from, because I went to the streets. That's sort of my passion, being on the streets with people. And I found my patients when we started my facility. And many of those people, I would say the heroin addicts that I treat, most of them have always been what I call straight up heroin addicts. They had a family history and a genetic predisposition, and their exposure was heroin. Their family used heroin, their cousins, their aunts, their uncles, they were sitting in a room and they were smoking heroin. And after they smoked heroin for a while, they started slamming heroin, which is injecting. And so they have been surrounded by all of these family members, and those of you in North County, it is rampant. Just heroin generationally is rampant. And so it's really incorrect to say that heroin just emerged because of that. You did have that happen sometimes, but there's not always a causal link to that. So I always like to kind of dispel that myth too.
The last time we spoke, what I found fascinating was what you were saying about the sort of personality traits of people like doctors and lawyers and maybe more educated people, of why we end up on the pills. And if you can tell everyone what you told me, it made perfect sense.
Absolutely. One of the things that was interesting when I was talking to Karen is that I know and respect Karen so much, and we're more or less the same age, and we are people that are successful, people that are good students have a very high risk for using opioids, because if the doctor tells us to, we're going to say, well, how do we do this? 3 times a day, 1 pill per 6-hour, 8-hour period, and you're just going to do that until you don't have any more? Well, that doesn't work, because what happens is you will, after 3-4 days of taking that as prescribed, experience a withdrawal symptom. Not to say you're dependent at that point, but you will experience, most of us would experience withdrawal potential with that. So when you are a good student and you have more or less medical naivete, and you are somebody who listens to a physician, and you are somebody who is, high functioning and understand that you need to do this in order to get better, you are at very high risk to potentiate addiction. And it's scary, because you may not realize, because you're listening to a doctor. One of the things I've learned in all of this is you need, and David mentioned this, a good physician. You need good people around you that you can trust, that, and also do your own research and be your own advocate. That's another big thing I've learned.
I thought it was also very interesting when I told you, my story about my Percocet prescription, and you said you are the perfect target, or, a person who's very vulnerable to this, and sort of explained to me, it's, I have the means and opportunity, the sort of naivety of the drug addiction and addictive properties of the drugs. And now that you've also pointed out the good student aspect, I think, as attorneys, we're rule followers, and we follow the rules. And if a doctor does tell us to take it, we're going to, and that's, and then I think I actually wrote down a quote you said when we were talking, like, hey, I took some pain pills for my knee surgery and now I'm a heroin addict. How did I get here? And
Yes.
That's sort of how it happens. So at the beginning of the evening, we had our members identify what we are, if they have had a prescription in the last, 10 years. I don't know, Lou, if you can provide and there's our response. Oh, wow. Okay. Only 32%. That's interesting. And some 10% not sure if the pain medication was an opioid. So, I think that really just shows that even at 32%, that's, a third of us are being prescribed opioids. And that's, something to really be cautious about. So Laura, what can someone do if they recognize they have a problem, seeking treatment? Once I realize, okay, I think I have an addiction, I think I have a problem, what do I do? It's a little overwhelming. Who do I reach out to? What does treatment look like?
So this is an area I could talk another, God knows how long on, but I'll try to be quick about this. So for opioid use disorder, medication or medically assisted treatment is really critical, because a person that is going to present at a regular rehab facility or a detox facility or an outpatient facility not utilizing medication is very unlikely to get better. And I'll tell you why. There's a 5 to 10% rate for abstinence-based programs for opioid use disorder, as opposed to an 80 to 95% success rate, roughly, for a person who remains on methadone maintenance treatment for 2 years or longer. This is very novel for some of you guys to, I know, think about, but I can honestly speak from research, from data, and also from experience, nearly 20 years in this. What happens, and we won't go into the physio at this point, but the idea that a person is going to go in and just white knuckle it and abstain is really kind of hard for these patients to fathom. What has happened as a result is patients have continued to use and basically create a false narrative around themselves as though they've been cured, that they're better, that they've gotten treatment and whatever. And that has also perpetuated the opioid epidemic, because those people have moved farther and farther into the shadows, because now they're more shameful because I got help, I did what I was supposed to do, and now I'm embarrassed. When you are on a medication and you get on the steady state dose, which I talk about the medications for opioid use disorder in my handout, so we can look at that there because we don't have time to go into them all. One of the key things is that when you tap into the receptor sites of your brain and you now are withdrawing the exogenous opioid that you are putting into your brain, the idea that all of a sudden, everything's just going to go back to normal and you're going to white knuckle it just because you're making behavioral and psychosocial interventions is very unlikely, specifically for opioid use disorder, because of the physical dependency. The physical dependency and the craving for the drug is the only thing that someone can think about. And it's hard for us to even fathom this. But that's not to say that those medications, as David alluded to, are easy to regulate, that are not having their own considerations that we have to look at. We really have to take into account some of the aspects that I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation and medicate appropriately. And it can be done. It can be done. But when you see patients overdosing, and a lot of times this comes up, methadone will be in someone's system. David example didn't have other opioids other than the MOUD, but what happens is there's a variety of factors that you guys aren't aware of as to why patients are essentially dying with a MAT drug in their system, a MAT medication, a variety of things that you wouldn't even think about. One, maybe CWS involvement. Maybe they have a court case. They have a family member that's forcing titration. They're forcing them to detox. There's a lot of factors that do not allow a patient to appropriately detoxify when ready. I'm sort of a moderate on the issue. I mean, methadone clinics in general were always thought of to be, we just want to keep us on forever and we want to make money. That's not my intention. If a person can detoxify safely, I say go for it. Unfortunately, what I've learned in doing this for so long, that that's not typically the case. It's hard to wrap your head around it. We wish it would be different, but unfortunately, these patients come in with extreme addictions. And that's the other thing I really hope you take away from this presentation. We think in society that we're just going to finish this off and they're going to be done. That's not how it works. It's a chronic disease that is full of relapse and lapse. And it's so hard for some of us to understand, I've worked in this for 20 something years and I got a patient right now who's just getting clean after all that time. I know people that have used for 40 years, they're just getting clean. So the length of time that it takes to deal with some of the level of severity and what these people have lost takes years and years of undoing. I really want you to take that away from this.
Well, and what you had mentioned about the methadone clinics have sort of a reputation of just come in and give you the meds and send you out the door. But I mean, I think that's sort of your approach has been very different. And, counseling is such a big part of what you do at SOAPMAT, and overall wellness is something, that's very important to you that maybe not all clinics, certainly in the past, have not. Do you feel that generally speaking, treatment is more coming around to including a counseling aspect and seeing that adds to the success rate?
Yes, you want cognitive behavioral therapy and motivational interviewing to be a strong part of your program. In fact, and again, this is not normal, but my way is that as a psychologist, the treatment and the behavioral health component is much more important than the medication. I just want to make sure I say that. The person needs to feel extremely validated and valued. You can only get that through love and support. And the medication is a tool. It should be secondary. It should always be considered secondary. And so that's how I work. It's a complete rework of the medical model where you're pushing meds. It's not that. I believe that you should stabilize the lowest level of medication. And my whole modality, and what I'm always so excited to tell people is that, and for your group as well, you see somebody with opioid use disorder, someone who's on the sneak, as I call it, someone who's not doing well, someone who's trying to cover it up. The best thing that you can do, aside from something that I need to tell you about SAMHSA, the best thing you can do, as cheesy as this sounds, love, love, love. I watch my body language. I lean in, I'm looking, I'm focusing, I'm crying. Sometimes I'm engaging. The person leaves feeling like there's somebody, as opposed to how they're treated in an emergency room many times, or by a friend or a family member who's just sick of this, sick of the cyclical cycle here, the behaviors and all that comes up, because it's not easy to deal with, let's be honest. But when they
you had mentioned some, you know, if we see someone, a colleague that we think is on the sneak or going through this, I know we have talked about the symptoms that might be recognizable, which are not similar to alcoholism, which, you know, is very different. But what kinds of symptoms, you know, might someone display that would alert us to a colleague who might be in trouble?
So the first thing, because I didn't get to it and I need to, is SAMHSA, SAMHSA is our federal institution. You go onto the SAMHSA website and you look under facility locator, and you can get facilities for any number of addictions. So SAMHSA is really your go-to. And SAMHSA regulates me. They're amazing. They bring forth a lot of new data. So SAMHSA is always your go-to. Also, for opioid use disorder, you really want to look at an opioid treatment program, AKA OTP, because we really are experts in opioid addiction. And I'm not trying to, you know, say this just because I own one. I'm saying this based on the research. You really see such a high level of people getting better on this level of in this type of treatment. Also, because a person can become more functional. They're not extracted from their environment. They can continue to be in their environment and go to this high touch environment at 5 o'clock in the morning and then go to work. So you get a lot more functionality in terms of the person doesn't have to leave their career, and they can actually, you know, have a high touch environment where they're seen all the time, but also continue with their life. With regard to the symptoms, so some of the symptoms, I mean, you guys, you kind of know, but some of them that you don't know maybe would be someone that all of a sudden has a great deal of sleep disturbance. With opioid use disorder, you see a lot of sleep disturbance where a formerly functional person all of a sudden is a night owl, and they cannot get up in the morning to do their tasks. That is one that is it's universal with opioid addiction. They are night owls, and they're doing everything all night long, and then they're sleeping during the day in the dark room. The other thing is a proclivity for candy. You know, I forgot to mention that one, Karen. We talked about that before. I can go in a store and look and point out the candy that my patients like. Sour Patch Kids, anything sour, anything kind of gummy, not chocolate, sorry folks, but you know, a very sweet candy. Donuts, I marketed in all of the donut shops in North County when I looked for my patients. So a lot of sweets, you know, becoming nocturnal, like I said, a very gray look, a very thin look, usually, you know, associated with weight loss, dry mouth, dental hygiene becomes poor. And it's different than what you might think. It just, the opioid wears away the enamel, whether in whatever way the person is taking it. A lot of patients also, they go like this when they're biting into pills. So you get, you know, that's relevant for you guys because, you will all of a sudden see a person seemingly normal look as though their tooth is actually half the size, which I've seen in higher functioning people with opioid use disorder, where they're gnawing on and that's a direct impact. So they're getting a lot of bang for their buck when they're using that way, and they're just biting at it. Isolating irritability, mood swings, agitation, low frustration tolerance, poor impulse control, being on the edge. That's just because, again, that's totally physiologically,
You mean more than lawyers already are on the edge?
Yeah.
You mean?
Yeah, even more.
So I know we're kind of reaching our 30 minutes, but I guess kind of one of the last questions I wanted to ask is, if someone does seek treatment, is this, what are we looking at? Are you in treatment forever? Or is this a lifelong process, or how long should someone really look at being in treatment if that's what's necessary?
I really speak to this on my last page of the handout, and I really want people to understand 2 years or more you're looking at for opioid use disorder, 2 years or longer to sustain recovery without chronic lapsing. That's very important to consider because, we're thinking about, detox, and we're thinking about patients going into an inpatient potentially and being better in 30 days. That's tough. I mean, I don't really see a lot of success stories that way, unfortunately. I mean, I've had patients leave me, go back and do 10 rehabs, and then come back to me years later and say, this is what I've been doing, and it didn't work. So you want someone to be engaged in treatment. Most likely the average is a minimum of 2 years. I had a person complete yesterday. I said, how long you been here? I always ask. She completed 3 years. And I said, what'd you think? Did it feel short or long? She said, it felt a little bit short, which I was surprised. And she was a street heroin addict who I met with scabies on her face, and she's fully functional now. She's amazing.
So in a real life scenario, let's say I need to have surgery and I'm prescribed, does this mean none of us should ever take these drugs for pain management? Or, just as our last kind of follow-up, is this it? No one can take these, we should totally avoid them? Or, how do we deal with this on a practical level?
I'm so glad you asked that. Yes, do not take them. I mean, that's the sad, I told Karen that I'm Italian, East Coast Italian, Jersey girl. You probably heard the accent. There's a group I belong to, a federal group called ATOD. They also have great information, AATOD. There's a bunch of Italians that are absolutely brilliant. A lot of them are MDs, PhDs, and they present every year. And it's always the same thing to the physician to physician. They say, don't prescribe, don't do it. They have regulations in Italy that prohibit opioid prescriptions, period. So you get a lot of people suffering and feeling real pain, but you have virtually, no opioid addiction there. What I tell people, as somebody who has had surgeries, who has basically white knuckled it after the surgery to not take anything, is that the ideation behind it should be, I'm going to take the least amount of medication and experience the most discomfort that I can before I go reach for that medication. That's the essential element.
And I think also, like what you and I talked about before, and I think what David mentioned too, is talk to your doctor about it. Tell them, what kind of symptoms you're having from taking it, how much you're taking, and make sure you're really communicating that. So I don't want to take any more time. I thank you so much. I think there actually is a question. Larry has said, as the doctor mentioned, persons with opioid addiction can appear to function normally, and their addiction may not be evident to a layperson. As attorneys, what signs should we look for to determine whether a colleague may have an addiction problem? I think we talked about that, as the excessive sweating, the poor dental hygiene, the gray pallor, the sort of turning into a night owl.
The other thing might be to that's a really good question. Pupil constriction or extreme dilation. That would mean they're either high or they're going through withdrawal, alternatively. The other thing is you will see a level of sweating from this person. There always is perspiration involved. And it might just be like, you just see a little bit of a different, tone on their face, just like kind of a raw sweat coming through. You will see that. But also I gotta hurry up and go somewhere. They don't really have to go anywhere. I gotta hurry up and go nowhere. One of those. They're always on a mission. my patients, and just real quick, I have to say this. If I go outside and I walk fast because I'm East Coast, if I go outside and I see them and I'm following them outside, they're gone. We have a joke with it. They're on a mission. They disappear. And it doesn't matter if they're a street heroin addict or a high functioning person. They move very fast. And so you're always looking for like, well, what are you going to do? Like, why do you have to go to the bathroom so much? Why aren't you hurrying up to go somewhere when we just sat down? Those kinds of things.
We have one more question from Steve Lopardo, who says, I'm having a knee replacement in a month. What pain medication would be acceptable? That's a great question.
I think that you should get nothing higher than Percocet. Most likely they'll give you Percocet, and then they'll downgrade you to like a Norco or a Vicodin. That would be acceptable. But again, maximum discomfort. I hate to say this. I mean, it doesn't sound good to me, but I'm saying it. Maximum discomfort, because you will feel better longitudinally, because you are going to suffer from, agitation and physical discomfort from taking the opioid too. So it's kind of like a catch-22, but they'll probably give you Percocet after, which is fairly strong, which you're going to use as least as possible. And then you're going to probably ask for a downgrade, and then you're going to wean yourself off that. That's very important.
All right. So I don't know if anyone has any other questions, but Laura, thank you so much. I really can't thank you enough. I know you could have talked for another 3 hours. You have so much to say about this, and you're just so passionate about it. And we appreciate very much you sharing your passion and your time with us.
Thank you so much. Thanks specifically to Honorable Michael and David. Thank you guys so much for ingratiating me when I signed on. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much. Thank you so much.
All right, so with that, let's go to our next team member. That's going to be Deborah Raymond. Deborah, if you want to take it from there.
Thank you. Wow, what a great presentation. Thank you, Dr. Rossi and Karen, for that presentation. I'm here to talk about the other bar. This is a resource that is available to all of us if we need help or know somebody that may need help. And the other bar is a private nonprofit corporation, and it's made up of a network of recovering lawyers, law students, and judges throughout the state. But we do have another bar here in San Diego. So there is a chapter here that people can go to for resources. The other bar is dedicated to assisting others who are having alcohol and substance abuse problems. And it's a voluntary program. And is founded on principles of anonymity and strict confidentiality, which is really important to the legal profession, I believe. Now, the network is there to help lawyers. It's lawyers basically helping lawyers. And they meet throughout the state. But again, we have a chapter here in San Diego. And for the most part, there are meetings, and you can usually get meetings on a weekly basis. However, this is not a 12-step program. They do follow some portion of the model of the 12-step program, but it is also a bridge to the larger community of recovery options, which include medical, therapeutic, religious, and secular. So it's very open. And in addition, the other bar is there to provide resources for attorneys such as MCLE programs. And they basically focus on recovery rather than on any other topic. They are looking to help people who can go through a recovery program. There's also a Shot of Sobriety loan program, which can help people who are attorneys and judges who are having problems with the cost and have financial needs. And it's just, they help with the costs associated with hospitalization and residential treatment. And the other bar also is completely unrelated to the disciplinary system of the California State Bar, which is good. Unlike the State Bar Lawyer Assistance Program, the other bar does not require payment of dues or fees to participate. It is focused on continuing recovery for life. And it differs from traditional AA and NA in that it is it's the only forum where lawyers can be open about their problems and the pressures directly related to the practice of law, which I think is important for lawyers who do have such a high susceptibility to addiction. The other bar provides resources in addition to MCLE courses. They have articles, and those articles relate to alcohol addiction. And they also have behavioral addictions such as gambling, recovery tailored towards judges, and there's a national helpline for judges. And they also have articles relating to self-destructive thoughts, stress and depression associated with chemical dependency. And they do talk about 12-step programs in their articles. Now, if you or somebody you know should need help or suffering from either alcohol addiction or chemical dependency, you can call the 800 number, which is 1-800-222-0767. But I've also included their brochure in our handouts that are given out to you. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to the next speaker, which is Phyllis Brown. Thank you. Is Phyllis there?
Was, and then we lost her camera for a second.
And also she is on mute.
Right. So Phyllis, if you can unmute yourself. Technology in the 21st century.
Maybe
Move
we
on
can
to-
go on to Stephen.
Yeah, let's jump to Stephen and we can come back to her.
All right, Stephen, if you're ready, you can talk to us about the rules of professional conduct.
I'm never ready, but